I think I've learned to just consciously slow down and learn that there is value in slowing down. There is value in taking time.
The more that we can get comfortable being uncomfortable, the easier moving those shifts and understanding what our intuition and signals are suggesting is going to be our best next step, the more easy it's going to be for us to hear that accurately.
I think it's more about consciousness and mindfulness and knowing when you need to push yourself to slow down or knowing when to push yourself to speed up.
Whether you want more innovation more easily, you are feeling burnt out or overwhelmed, or you simply know that something isn't quite the way you know it can be, you are not alone. I hear the same from leaders every day. On Uncommon Leadership, we explore aligning personal fulfillment with business success, creating authentic teams, and cultivating the resilience, adaptability, and ease necessary to move beyond simply surviving today's challenges into thriving. I'm Michael Hunter with Uncommon Teams, and today we'll uncover fresh insights into what it means to lead today. And joining me is Lynn Juang. Lynn is an award-winning creative leader, strategic consultant, and founder of Frameworks Consulting, providing brand and business strategy for design-focused leaders and creative agencies. With 2 decades of experience spanning branding, design, strategy, and operations, working with entrepreneurial, founder-led studios, she now works with clients on everything from brand foundations, strategic planning, organization design, change management, and leadership advisory. Welcome, Lynn.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
I have been looking forward to this conversation all day. When did you first recognize that integrating your whole self and bringing that into everything that you do might be a valuable approach?
Oh, wow. I think as I progressed in my career, and I think having managed teams and certainly going through something as challenging as the pandemic, where that really upended, I think, our understanding of sort of personal boundaries, professional boundaries, or lack thereof, and just how much, macro forces can really influence our day to day. I think that's probably around where I started to want to kind of integrate more of how we are in the world and move throughout the world and integrating, I think, personal values with professional values. And really they can be one and the same. I think we're kind of unofficially conditioned to think of them as separate things. But I think certainly in the last, 5 to 7 years, as things out in the wild get continually upended, I think the importance of knowing to, at the end of the day, you can come back to self. We can rely on ourselves more than anyone else or anything else. That I think is really has become much more, I think, prevalent for me. Yeah.
That is true, that wherever we go, we are there.
Exactly. I think we've all been through different situations and scenarios in our lives where we are our sometimes we are our own worst enemy, but we're also our own best friend and our best support system. And I think the idea of self-reliance in a healthy way, I think, is really important for us to be able to navigate whatever the world throws at us, whatever work throws at us, or whatever family personal life throws at us. Having that real strong sense of self, a strong sense of your core values. And I think that really shows up as a leader, especially because you are there to model a lot of good behavior that is above and beyond, or not, I shouldn't say above and beyond, more than just maybe the expertise in whatever field or industry you're in, but modeling sort of behavior, modeling communication, modeling just the way that we show up for each other and for ourselves.
What helps you consistently show up for yourself, especially in a world like the pandemic, like now, where so often many other people and influences are telling us that that's the opposite of what we should do.
I think I know this sounds a bit overused, but I think I just really subscribe to, you know, when you go on an airplane and they say you got to put your oxygen mask on first. I really believe in that. I really believe that we have to make sure that we are in a good place before we're able to be in a good place for others. I think as someone who has always been in some sort of management, or whether it's on like a team, like a very small team basis or on a company basis, as an older sister, as you know, in various partnerships, I think I'm wired to take care of others, right? To make sure that we're working towards a greater good, and that, you know, everyone else is taken care of, everyone else is fed, and all that. But I think that we can't do so at our own expense, and that you know, by putting ourselves, we can put others first when we actually put ourselves first, which is, I know, a bit counterintuitive, but I think as someone who's had to play caretaker in various facets of my life, I've learned that by giving away too much of yourself ultimately can be detrimental to yourself, to your and whatever sort of environment you're in, whether you're talking about a work environment or a personal environment. So I really think starting from within is really important. And frankly, I've learned to be very selfish, and I don't think selfish is a bad word. I think you know, if you're selfish in a positive way, again, making sure that you are your healthiest version of yourself, whatever that might mean for you, you will be in a much better headspace to lead, to guide, to collaborate, to advise. So I really believe that it starts from within.
I agree that selfish is the opposite of a bad word. And I'm always curious how everyone understands, as you said, that if those oxygen masks come down on a plane, you got to put yours on first so that you have the air to breathe to help everyone else around you. And yet, every other part of our lives, so many people, so much of every sort of influence tells us the exact opposite. What has helped you find that inner fortitude to ignore all of these voices saying, no, 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 selfish is bad. You've got to take care of others before yourself, and to do what you know is right so that you can, will help you best take care of everyone else?
I think what is really helpful for me, and it's not so much a tactic or a hack per se. I think it's just more of a mindset. I think it's about learning to take your time, and I think that we are conditioned to want to move very fast, right? Build fast, launch fast, succeed quickly, or as soon as possible. And those aren't inherently, you know, bad things to aspire to or to work towards. But I think when we sort of blitz through things and don't take time to pause and take stock and take inventory of what's working, what's not working, what feels good, what doesn't feel good, we pay for it in the end. And so I think I've learned to just consciously slow down and learn that there is value in slowing down. There is value in taking time. There is value in moving at whatever speed or pace feels right at the time. And I also think that with slowing down, it allows the other things to rise to the forefront, right? Because when you're moving so fast, it's easy to gloss over things. It's easy to skip ahead. It's easy to avoid conflict. It's easy to avoid some of the things that you're like, I don't want to touch that. I'm just going to like gloss through it and I'll kind of pretend that it's not there and kind of brush it under the rug. So I think when we coach ourselves to move a little bit slower, it forces us to reconcile with things that kind of come up, that we allow things to come up that we maybe, that are a bit challenging to confront. But I think that's healthy and I think that's necessary. And so I think giving myself the time and space to allow things to bubble up to the surface and then to address it pretty head on. And I will say, I have the advantage of I don't have children, I don't have a partner, I don't have other things in my life that many other people do that just frankly take up a lot of your time and your energy. And so it is probably easier for me, kind of running solo to do that for myself. But to the degree that I can, and I think to the degree that anyone is able to carve out time for themselves, it may not look like what it looks like for me because I have certain advantages of time. But I do think that really embracing the slowdown is incredibly important and valuable. And I think with that, that will start to your priorities and your values, I think, really start to come to the surface. Right? You're not just like barreling forward and kind of moving headlong into things and diving headfirst into things. I think it makes you a lot more present. And I feel like I'm just throwing all these buzzwords into one word salad, but I do think that it's when you slow down things, you pay attention to things differently, you let things come into focus in a different way or into focus at all. And I think we would all be better off doing more of that, in whatever way that might make the most sense, for you.
100%. And two things come up for me as I listen, and I'm curious how these fit for you. One is that it isn't, maybe it isn't necessarily going slower that's important as being conscious and thoughtful. Some
Mm-hmm.
people work better going fast.
Yep.
And so going slow isn't going to help them actually bring the thought that really permeates everything I heard from what you were just saying.
Mm-hmm.
And then the second, which is going to sound opposite to what I just said, is that if going slow feels uncomfortable, it's probably important to do. Just as if going fast feels uncomfortable, that's probably also important to do, because everything that we do as we're learning and growing, if we really want to move forward, is going to involve moving into some uncomfortableness. And so the more that we can get comfortable being uncomfortable, the easier moving those shifts and understanding what our intuition and signals are suggesting is going to be our best next step, the more easy it's going
Yeah,
to be for us to hear that accurately.
I think that's a really great point, and I agree with both points. I think that you're exactly right. I think there's a time and place to move slow, and there's a time and place to move fast. So maybe how I might reframe that overall is knowing how to calibrate the speed in a given moment when you're dealing with a given issue or whatever. So I think you're right. I think it's more about consciousness and mindfulness and knowing when you need to push yourself to slow down or knowing when to push yourself to speed up. So I think it's about having a real clear sense, kind of having a finger on your own pulse of knowing which speed is more appropriate at that time. So yeah, so it's less about one or the other. It's about knowing when to dial it up and when to dial it down.
What helps you understand where that dial should be set at any given moment?
Um, that's a really good question. I think so. I have a couple of different responses. I've learned I've learned to really trust my intuition, which I know sounds like a very vague woo-woo thing to say, but um, I think I've learned to trust my intuition and I've learned to listen. And I think maybe just to go back to what we were saying a few minutes ago, I think that's a big part of the whether you're slowing down or speeding up, that consciousness and that ability to listen to what maybe your intuition is trying to tell you. So I think I've really tried to build that muscle for myself. Um, and in the same vein of listening, I listen to a lot of different podcasts, books where I'm quite I'm a very curious person by nature, and I'm always looking for new inputs and new stimuli. And I again, sometimes it veers into too like stimulus overload, and sometimes that can tip over to a not helpful place where there's just too much information, and then that's a different sort of kind of paralysis. But I do find that there are just so many really helpful thought leaders and writers and speakers who have I think have really been who have really like shed a light on some of these things that we're talking about again in different sort of contexts. But I think that learning to listen, I think, to myself and to the right, call them experts, thought leaders, whatever you want to call them, I think has helped me. But I think it has to come from a place of curiosity and a place of wanting to invest time in that. Um, Again, like I was saying, I know a lot of people, they don't have the luxury of time. They're running businesses, they have families, they are caretakers. It's hard to carve out the time and space to find the time to listen. So I think figuring out the right ratio of where you're spending that time and energy, it's hard. So I acknowledge that that's hard, but I have the luxury of time, and so or my own time rather, and so um, I I've trained myself to listen quite well.
And it doesn't have to be a huge amount of time. It's 1 or 2 minutes a day can make an
It doesn't.
enormous difference.
Absolutely. It does. It's not, that's exactly right. I think a lot of the things that we're talking about, they don't have to be these like quantifiable. It's not about volume or depth or breadth. A lot of it is just, frankly, just being committed to doing it or practicing it or even just being aware of it. That alone, I think, is incredibly powerful. So, I've had conversations with friends and family members who are like, oh, but I'm so busy, well, I couldn't do that. I can't go for a 30-minute walk, hour walk. I don't, I've got the dogs to walk and the kids to drop off at school and things like that. And it's like, well, it's not really a matter of time. It's not the number of minutes or hours. It's just, there can be ways to, I think, fold these practices into the day to day. I come from a client services account management background, and so from early on in my career, I've learned to be like, all right, well, I know we can't do this, but what can we do? Right? It doesn't have to be this like, it has to be 10 out of 10. It's like, what can we take from a practice or a piece of advice or whatever? And what can we extract and extrapolate from that and interpret and translate it in such a way that works for us, right? Maybe I can't do everything that you're doing, but what can I glean from that would be applicable and doable and feasible for myself? So I think you're right. It's not about the amount of time or the number of books you read or the amount of that it's a 2 hour walk versus a 5 minute walk. It's just the commitment to that curiosity and the pursuit of it.
Pretty much everyone I've talked with, when we really get in and look, there is at least one thing they spend time on that isn't adding the value they initially thought it was. And so it's pretty easy to stop doing that that's not adding value and instead spend that couple minutes doing some listening. And listening doesn't have to be out on a walk or sitting down in a room doing nothing for however time you invest in this. It can be while you do dishes, while you drive the kids to school and back, or any time where you can have a couple minutes where you don't need to interact with anyone else, even if they are around, and you can take the time to listen.
Mhm.
For people in our audience who want to get started with listening and getting in touch with their intuition and don't know how, what would you suggest they start?
I would suggest starting with Julia Cameron's The Artist's Way, which are you familiar with The Artist's Way?
I, yes, I know this. I love this.
So, uh, in all transparency, I did not finish reading the book, but I'm a big fan of the morning pages, which is a very simple writing practice. You know, first thing in the morning, and it's really a way to kind of clear the mental cobwebs and just doesn't have to be any rhyme or reason. It's just whatever's in your head and just get it out onto the page, handwritten. Um, so I started doing that, and over time, um, I think that for me was one of the actual practices that I took on that really helped, I think, up level my ability to listen to myself. And, there are some days where it's just a free write and it's just gobbledygook and there's, doesn't makes no sense. And then some days there are like, oh, wow, I thought I didn't know where to start. I was just kind of writing what I saw out the window. And next thing I know, something from my past has bubbled up and I'm kind of doing a bit of self therapy and kind of processing that. Um, that I think is a great way in because it is, and again, it requires a commitment. But it doesn't require more than a piece of paper and a pen and a little bit of time. But I think it's a great way in because it just sort of, it makes you it's so low lift that you can kind of get into it very easily. It's quite frictionless, and I think that's where a lot of people, myself included, would get very um, uh, quickly demotivated by things that felt like it was like hard to do, or that I needed the perfect space, or I needed this gadget, or I needed this app, or whatever. I appreciate that morning pages is really analog, it's really low lift, and so the way in is quite frictionless. And over time, I think you start to lean into letting things just come out and process them. But to what you were saying a few minutes ago about kind of knowing when things work and when things don't, and our point around knowing how to calibrate or recalibrate, I don't force myself to do it every day. There was a moment when I knew I needed it, and I needed a morning practice um, to ground my day and my routine. I also knew that at some point, and I can't quite pinpoint it necessarily, but I could feel at some point it actually started tipping over into more of a procrastination tactic. And I knew that, yes, it was healthy to be writing and, do all these things, but I knew that I was using it as an excuse to like not do other things. So I've learned to just kind of know when I need it, when it's useful. And I now know when it's like, I'm really just making excuses for myself. But as a relatively simple first step into mindfulness, into learning to listen, into learning to calibrate, I think morning pages, whatever you want to call it, journaling, morning pages, whatever, is really powerful because we don't write anymore, right? We're typing with thumbs and we're scrolling. And I know I'll misquote it, but I know she writes about how the power of it. It's not typing. It's not typing on a tablet or a keyboard. It is to physically write. And I know there's science behind the connection between physically writing what is in your head. Um, And we're just so unused to that physical practice now. And so I think that alone is also, it's the physical act forces us to slow down a bit. The last time I wrote frantically was like over 20 years ago, in college, those like blue books where we would have to like hand write essays or hand write, these like long form answers to whatever the test was. That's not how we work anymore. And so again, I think that is where I think the pacing thing does come into practice, where we're so used to being able to fire things off so quickly. This practice really does force us to slow down at least a little bit. And with that slowdown, things come up to the surface. We can process it. We can release it. We can, I think just the act of putting it down on a page is incredibly powerful, and something that I highly recommend for people who are kind of just starting to like, all right, what can I do to sort of insert some different energy into my day, that would really better equip me as a leader, as a parent, as a partner, whatever. I think morning pages are a great place to start.
I like the low liftness of this. And for people listening who that even seems way too big of a lift, a way you can take even a smaller step is to start listing on inconsequential decisions, like which shoes am I going to wear today? Do I start with my left leg or my right leg when I put my pants on? If I'm out walking the dog, which direction do I go at each intersection? These are decisions that if you get them wrong, probably it's no big deal. The world is not going to come to an end. It won't ruin the rest of your day. And it lets you listen in very little bite-sized chunks.
Yeah, I think those are great tips. Those are things that we do so unconsciously and so out of habit and out of default that yeah, just taking the half a second to think about, or not even think even feels like too big of a word, just to be aware of the thing that you are doing, the thing you're picking up, the color you're choosing, yeah, I think those little micro habits are also great, easy tools to add into the toolkit.
And one of the amazing things about these little micro activities is that every time you do even the tiniest little bit of this, it's a little bit easier, a little bit more natural to be conscious and to remember to do this the next time and the next time and the next time. And it's like compound interest with finance. Before you know it, you're enormously conscious all the time of what's going on just by all these little micro moments of consciousness.
Absolutely. It took me a long time to understand or appreciate why people call it a mindfulness practice or a yoga practice, or things like that. I don't do yoga, but I previously it was a bit of an eye roll, like, oh, your mindfulness practice, whatever. But it wasn't until I started incorporating more of that for myself, and it was after I left my full-time job a few years ago, and I started doing it. I was like, oh, now I get it. It is a practice. It is something you are doing every day, and it's really not about the quality of the thing. It's the act of doing it, and it's the consistency and the repetition. And so I finally was like, I see the light. Like I understand why people refer to it as a practice, because there's no end goal or end state, right? It's an ongoing. I like that, practice doesn't have to have it doesn't have to have an end state attached to it. It can, but it doesn't need to. And I think that helps to take the pressure off of the need to, again, I think when we take on these different activities, we we're sort of unconsciously trying to like win at them, or like graduate to the next level of whatever the thing is that we're talking about. And sometimes it's no, we're just meant to be here, and that's okay. And it's the purpose is not to progress in the conventional sense. The purpose is to practice, and the purpose is that is the goal. The goal is to practice, not in service of something else. So I think, yeah, I think that those are all of everything that you're saying makes a lot of sense. That it's just that repetition, it's building that muscle, it's building that consistency over time.
Yes. How do you, Lynn, build cultures where people feel safe and empowered to bring their unique talents into everything that they do?
Yeah. I think that it's really important to I think it's really important to share the context of the maybe the conversation that we're having, or the initiative that we're working on, or the project we're about to start. I think when it comes to building culture, I think it has to start with creating alignment in the environment, right? And I think that culture, it's such a big, fuzzy, mushy word that can mean lots of different things. Um, but I think it starts from alignment. And I think with alignment comes safety. Um, Maybe sometimes it's the other way around, or maybe they're parallel, but I think that for people to feel um, excited and seen and acknowledged and welcomed and all of these things, I think we need to make sure that we are all very clear the where we are this where we are starting from, that we're starting from this shared point in time, or this shared step, and that there's a lot of clarity on where we're going. I think it's also about making very clear the expectations and defining the edges of whatever it is that we're talking about, right? Because I think I think that there's sometimes not enough rigor in answering the question of like how to create a culture of empowerment, right? Like it's sort of left at this kind of um, it's left in a very kind of loose place, and it manifests as just being a bit of a just being nice and letting people do whatever they want, and being very uh wanting to like build the cool company or have the cool culture where it's a little bit anything goes. And I think where which is fine, but I think that to really build a culture that is resonant and successful, you have to define the boundaries, and you have to define the expectations. You have to define the parameters so that everyone knows, okay, that is going to be too far. This is within bounds. The expectations are to, whether it's to deliver a thing or behave a certain way or what have you, like make the expectations known, and and to not assume that not assume anything. That was the best lesson I ever learned from my first creative director, was never assume. And I've taken that with me for 25 years, because it forces you to answer the question why, right? And I think that applies to really tactical things like whatever the work output is, but I think it also applies to the culture and the sort of intangible aspect of culture that is so, kind of hard to put into words or to codify. But we should try. Like I think we should try to codify it, in a not in the pursuit of automation or efficiency, or to make it like robotic or anything like that, but it's so that we have a shared language to talk about things, so that we have a shared understanding of what it is that we're working towards and how we plan to work together to get there. So I think I went into like 10 different directions answering that question, but I think it's really it's that alignment. And then with that alignment, you can then create a sense of safety. And then with that sense of safety, people can kind of they know where to play within those boundaries.
What helps you recognize where you are making assumptions?
I think it's really I think it's as simple as always asking why and building a system of checks and balances for yourself as well as for a process or a project or whatever. But to really build that into sort of your internal monologue, right? It's like, oh, well, I assumed so and so did X, Y, or Z. The next question should be, wait, why did I assume that? And I think, again, going back to what we were saying earlier about moving a little bit too fast, and again, there is time for that, but sometimes when we move too fast, we don't make space for asking and answering some of these questions that I think are really important questions to ask, even though they might not yield, again, like a tangible outcome, or it might feel like it only feels like a waste of time if you don't know where to find value in it. And I think there's a lot of value in always asking why, and just to not assume that things are the way they are, to not assume that people do things for a certain reason or not. And I think oftentimes when I've worked with peers, direct reports, clients, what have you, just by asking why kind of makes everyone kind of cock their head and be like, oh, well, I don't know. And then that kind of opens up and unlocks another pathway to another, line of inquiry. And that often starts to unlock different ideas and different strategies and different perspectives on how to move forward.
Yes. And that question is a great way to find activities that are not adding the value we think they are. For example, I have yet to meet anyone who wants to read a status report.
Right.
Everyone I've ever met who's asking other people to give them status reports,
Yeah.
they don't want the words. There's something else that value that they're asking for. And sometimes an email or written document is the best way to supply that value. Most times there's some other way that's much, much more powerful for both sides to provide that value. And oftentimes much more faster and much more enjoyable. And then suddenly there's all this free time to do other things that are creating much more value, or that we can take to do that introspection and reflection that we were talking about earlier.
Yeah, I think it's really important to not be beholden to process for the sake of it, right? Unless you're working in a factory on an assembly line, then absolutely there is a very specific process to get to make a machine or whatever, and that process has to be followed. Most of us don't work, you know, most of us don't work in a factory, and we don't work on an assembly line, right? So I think that I would talk a lot about this with teams where I'm all about systems and I'm all about processes, and I love an SOP and I love a playbook, but those are meant to be baselines and guiding posts. They are not set in stone. They are not the only way to do things. It is, again, it's a way in. If you come up with I think we default too much to the process and not the outcome, right? So if we're taking status report, for example, all right, the way that we've done status reports historically is we update them in Notion, or we issue a PDF at the start of a Monday, or what have you, whatever the process might be. Um, that's one way to do it. But what are we really looking for? We want an update. We want to know where something is at. We want to know what next steps are involved. We want to know any course correcting that we might need to do. We just want to know what is happening, in as real time as possible. We want to know we want to be able to plan for whatever is next, or fix whatever broke along the way. So it's not about the process or the thing or the way to get there. And I think it's hard for people to decouple process from outcome, because they are sort of taught that one leads to another, and one can lead to another. But I think it's more about understanding what it is that you're looking for, why you're looking for it, which might then help other people or whoever else is helping you get there to be like, oh, well, if that's what you're looking for, I don't need to spend 2 hours writing this report. If what you're looking for is X, why don't I do this instead? How about we try this other means to an end, right? So I think all of these are sort of related of like taking the time to just like ask why, um, and just continue to sort of like scratch beneath the surface of what it is that we're all trying to work towards. Because I'd like to think that the chances are pretty high that someone else has a better idea than I do, or a new idea of some process we came up with 3 years ago. What worked 3 years ago, what worked 3 weeks ago may not work now, right? And I think that that agility is such a critical part of management and leadership, right? It's like I'm not here to make sure everyone is following this exact process. I'm here to make sure that we are getting to our our destination or our goal. If we've followed the process to get there successfully, great. If you've come up with another way to get there, also great, right? And so I think, again, aligning, going back to your sort of question a few questions ago around creating a sense of empowerment and a culture of empowerment. It's like it's saying those things out loud, right? Like, this is our objective, this is our goal. Here's one way we can get there, but don't be beholden to the process, be beholden to the outcome. So you have permission to explore other means to the same end as long as we are keeping the same end in sight, right? So aligning at the start, aligning at the finish line, however you get there in between, I don't really care as long as it works and isn't, maybe isn't costing the company an arm and a leg, but like let's align at those at the start and the finish, and then you have room to play in between and figure out the best way to get there. And then over time, I feel like that the energy that comes with being given permission and being able to come up with different ways of doing things starts to fire uh, different ideas and more freedom to play, right? And certainly we're talking in very vague generalizations. It very much depends on kind of what industry you're in and what line of work you're in. But I think as a whole, like philosophically, there's a lot that we can there. What version of that works for your industry, right? What version of that works for your business? I do believe that there are, you know, we can take certain best practices and kind of mold them in a way that makes sense for our own teams or our own companies.
Absolutely. I find the same that we often have more control over the way we implement something than we might believe. To continue the status report example, just because manager is the one who's supposed to send the status report email up the chain doesn't mean manager has to be the one to put it together. If there's someone else on a team who would be way more excited about putting that together and telling the story of what the team did that time period, let them do it. They're going to have a lot more fun. The manager's going to has time to do something else. And that story is probably going to come through much more effectively and efficaciously as well. So it's just goodness all around.
Yeah, absolutely.
This maybe is part of the question, part of the answer to my next question of what is the business value of creating these cultures where people are safe and empowered?
I think the first thing that comes to mind is retention. I think from a purely kind of brass tacks business perspective, I think the more opportunity you're able to create for people in an environment of alignment and safety and flexibility, again, whatever flexibility might mean for that business, um, I think that goes a long way for teams. I think that builds a lot of goodwill, and it when done well, it builds this sort of like a, a system of reciprocity, right? Oh, you saw something in me, now I feel more invested, or what else could I do, right? I think it really I think it can kickstart a lot of energy and excitement and personal. I hesitate saying investment. I don't love that word, but it, you know, I've had moments in my career where like I was given opportunities, and it makes me want to do more and do better. That's all it comes down to. And so the more we can sort of empower and educate and inspire the teams we already have, um, the better it is for the bottom line, right? I mean, we all know the cost of hiring and onboarding, and it's always a gamble. You could have gone through 25 rounds of interviews and think you know someone, but until they're there, you don't really know. It's always going to be a bit of a risk. So I think I'm sure there are other very tangible business benefits, but the first thing that comes to mind is retention. Because without your people doing whatever it is that you're doing, whether you're making widgets or selling consulting services, like without the people, then there's nothing to be had, right? So um, I think retention would be my first answer. And I think that also can emanate outwards too. I think with retention, with that goodwill, with that the empowerment and the engagement that you're instilling in people, chances are there's an audience on the other side of it, clients on the other side of it. Like the ripple effect of that culture, I think does come back around, right? So I've always been in like a services business, creative services, and so there's always clients on the other side. And when you feel empowered to that your when you know that your involvement matters, that will translate to the way that you work with your clients, and your clients will feel that. And that's what keeps them it's a big part of what keeps them coming back, right? It's a big part of what is that goes into that kind of relationship building, right? So it's relationship building from the inside, from leadership to the teams, between teams, and then that sort of starts to that can emanate outward and radiate outward into all of the people that it impacts, whether it's your consumers, your clients, whoever's on the other side of that relationship. So I think it can only be good outcomes by investing in building up a culture.
And that ripple effect is compounding, has compounding effects. One of the reasons I do what I do is that if I can help a leader show up just a little bit more of who they are, then even without doing anything else, everyone else in their team is able to be just a little bit more of who they are. And everyone that they interact with is able to be just a little bit more who they are. And this ripples out and out so that pretty soon, just by helping one leader, I'm helping the whole world be a little bit more who they are.
Yeah, and as you're saying that, it makes me think of I think this was it's very top of mind now, but I think it was very much top of mind. I think especially during the pandemic, but the idea of like bringing your whole self to work, and that whole thing. Um, I don't know that I have a particularly strong opinion on that verbiage per se, but what it does make me think of is I always, always, always emphasize the importance of providing context. Again, providing the why, right? So let's talk about bringing ourselves to work, right? And just using more of an individual example. Um, I'm making this up. This is not a real person. Someone on, let's say it's someone on your team, and every Tuesday and Thursday, they are out of there at 5 o'clock on the dot, right? And as much as you try to instill this, like, oh, as long as everyone gets their work done, it's fine. Or maybe your hours are not until 5 or whatever it may be. all you see is that this person, everyone else is, is really kind of um, uh, feels like they're doing more, and this person's always bouncing. Um, and I think when you don't ask why and you don't ask for context or are not given context, you start making assumptions and you start finding reasons to back up your assumptions or to validate your assumptions, even though they are completely wrong. And finally, and maybe this is your direct report, and maybe the company has not been in the practice of having regular one-on-ones, and now there's a new initiative where you have one-on-ones with your direct reports every whatever 2 weeks. So now you finally have these one-on-ones, and you come to learn that this person has to leave early, on a regular basis because they are a caretaker for a family member, and they need to be picked up from, I don't know, taken to an appointment or a facility or whatever it is. And they never felt like they didn't know if they could share that, right? They were not clear that this was an environment where they could feel safe to share something like that. Also, they were never asked. And so no one ever brought it up, so I didn't say anything. But now that you're asking, actually, the reason I have to leave early or whatever is because I need to deal with this family issue. Okay, great. Oh, that actually makes so much sense. Let's bring it out into the open. Now I understand your why. Now we can talk about the implications that has been having on your work or other team members or whatever. Um, and it changes the conversation. And by bringing in a bit of that, I guess, vulnerability, it creates a relational and a relatability, right? Like, oh, now I understand where you're coming from. Now I can help you come up with different ways to work around it, or we can do it together. Really, is what we should be doing, to co-creating a way for your work to not be impacted, other people's work to not be impacted. Da, da, da. But it's like I feel like 9 times out of 10, like if you know the why, then we don't get into our heads about like, oh, they're not performing, or they're like quiet quitting, or whatever the newfangled buzzword of the day is. It's like, oh, there's a good reason for it. Okay, no big deal. Life happens to everybody. So let's make sure that everyone feels comfortable to share that. You don't need to blast it out to the open, but your manager should probably know. Like, but that's on your manager to create an environment where you feel um, safe and empowered to be able to share that. Great, now we know, and now we know what we're working with, and now we can come up with ways to fold that into the workflow or whatever it is, right? And so, kind of forget where I was going with this, but I think that the point being of just like the openness and provide that's what it was, the providing context, that without context you leave a lot of room for false assumptions, and false assumptions lead to really unnecessary, often negative lines of thinking. And if we were just upfront at the outset about the context of a decision, an ask, an initiative, more often than not, the people on the receiving end of that would be like, oh, okay, that makes sense. I don't like it, but I get it, right? And so I think context is everything, and I think I feel very strongly that being able to share and provide context would help mitigate. I'm not going to say solve, but it will mitigate a lot of um, issues in the workplace and outside of the workplace, just in life in general.
Yes, I'm reminded of the cliched aphorism of assumption makes an ass out of you and me.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's right. That's right.
How do you help people find their way through all the change, uncertainty, and overwhelm that seems to be filling life these days?
I think it's constantly reminding ourselves and each other that there just is only so much can we can do, and so um, whatever we can control is what we can control, and everything else we have to figure out how to release everything else, which is incredibly difficult right now, in particular. Um, but I think going back to some of the things we talked about around mindfulness and consciousness and um, calibrating, where we're at. I think that's where it really comes into play, where we are inundated with so much negativity right now. That alone takes a lot of energy to filter it out. Um, but the more we can, I think, build that muscle of knowing when to listen, and to your point, knowing when not to listen, and knowing when to, not get sort of sucked into the current of everything that's swirling around out there. Um, I think whatever we can do to constantly bring ourselves back to center and remind ourselves of putting things into perspective, which again is such an overused phrase, but it's true, right? Like, we do what we can, we take care of ourselves and our loved ones, and um, the compounding effect of doing good by myself, and then the effect of doing good by you, and then my team, and then I think again over time that will compound and as it radiates outward. But it's really hard to see that when there is so much volatility and violence and uncertainty out there. But I think it's a now more than ever a really important muscle to try and exercise, of like learning to learning how to calibrate, learning to listen, learning when to slow down, when to speed up. I don't know what you call that muscle, but I think that is something we need to take the time to um, to grow to grow that muscle.
Part of that is asking why on as many perspectives as we can come up with for the situation. If, however wrong we may think someone else is, they probably think they're 100% correct. And if we can get into their frame of mind, they probably are 100% correct from that perspective. And just as we are 100% correct from our perspective, because every perspective is the experience that we're having. And so it's correct just because we're having it. And the more that we can understand each other's perspective, then the more we can start helping everyone come to a consensus, which doesn't have to mean agreement that
Right.
on a single perspective. It's agreement on here's how we combine our diverse perspectives, which may seem completely conflicting, in a way that allows us to fruitfully move forward in the ways that each of us value.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think it can't always be about a unanimous decision or agreement on something. But I think, again, to the degree that it makes sense for whatever business context, it's moving forward, right? And we all need to be moving a project forward, an initiative forward, whatever the directive may or may not be. So I think it is about knowing when to, I think, prioritize just movement and progress, and accepting that it might be 6 out of 10 and might be 8 out of 10, but it's moving the thing forward. And as long as, in the absence of a unanimous agreement, as long as as a leader, you've done everything you can to communicate the context and communicate the priorities and the goals. And if someone doesn't agree, but at least they've heard you, then that's really all there is you can do, right? Like I was just saying this to a client yesterday. I can't remember exactly what I had written, but it was to the effect of like, we can't control how a client is going to respond to a creative direction or a strategy or whatever. Um, but what we can control is the clarity with which we define the thing, and that internally, as a company, we are aligned on what this means for us, right? So if hopefully that lands for you, but if nothing else, like we know that we've done everything we can to be in alignment with each other and to define it in such a way that as is clear and is comes with context and comes with clarity. Again, we've done what we can in our control, and hopefully that will land on the other side. But if it doesn't, it doesn't. I think this acceptance, again, this knowing when to kind of push for consensus versus accepting a little bit of dissent in service of progress, I think is it's hard, but that's sort of the nature of leading anything. It's the nature of progress and it's the nature of moving things forward. Some things will get left behind, or not everyone is along for the ride, and that's just that's part of the reality of it.
Yes. For people who would like to get in contact with you to help build alignment and understand what they're feeling, whether that's about branding, strategic planning, organizational design, or simply making time for all this listening, what's the best way for them to get in contact with you?
Best way to reach me is via good old email. My email is hello@frameworks-consulting.com. Um, as much as I'm pro analog and handwritten everything, email would be the best way to reach me.
I'll have that and your LinkedIn links in the show notes. What would you like to leave our audience today with, Len?
I don't know that I have a go-to pearl of wisdom necessarily, but I think, just on the heels of everything that we talked about, I think take whatever time you can to just take a beat, listen, and ask why. Maybe that's the pearl of wisdom, is to take a beat, listen, and ask why. That's it.
Great. Thank you for this fabulous conversation today, Len.
Thank you. It was really great to chat, and I hope that it was helpful, for anyone listening. And yeah, I really appreciate you having me on the show.
You're welcome. Audience, thank you for joining us as well. Len and I would love to know, why did you explore today? Thanks and have a great day.
Thanks. Have a great day.